market has evolved in terms of, you know, sustainability, the efficiency of the technology that we've been discussing, and all the innovations that go with it. And Joe has seen that, I guess, in all of its intricacies while he's been combing through all the data that he's analysing. So Joe, I guess if we want to start with the changes, if we're not too sick of hearing about the pandemic, you know, how things have evolved with the huge change that we all went through. What trends have we seen develop since the pandemic, and how has this been reflected in the market data?
Sure. So I would like to begin just briefly by pointing you to the digital textile market tracker, which users can find under the Discovery tab on at WTiN.com. It's a comprehensive tool which has, since it was established in 2015, tracked the growth of the digital textile printing market, specifically the roll-to-roll segment. And I just want to emphasize the word growth, because up until 2019, the trajectory was very positive. But obviously, more recently, due to the turbulent times in which we're all living, there have been a few bumps in the road. So to begin with, the first half of 2020, when we were also from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, productivity slumped, which was understandable. But what wasn't expected was the swift recovery. So in the second half of 2019,
has this mic gone off? Something all right? Want to start talking again? See if it's. Oh. I think there's something wrong with Joe's mic. Can he just use the handheld if there's. Start singing as a song on there. Thank you. Do you just want to say something first to check everyone can hear you at the back?
Yeah, hopefully, yeah, they can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay, so as I was saying, the second half of 2019 was much better than expected in terms of productivity around the globe. Mm-hmm. It was largely level with what we saw at the end of 2019, and that demand continued into the first half of 2021, where in the first half of 2021 we saw unprecedented productivity, and that was the same across all industries, where there was a lot of pent-up consumer spending. And it put a big strain on the supply chain, and we saw the bottlenecks in ports. There was a shortage of shipping containers, etc. And therefore, you know, the cost increased, and that pushed up inflation, and ultimately productivity slowed down. And so I think in 2021, we saw 3.7 billion square meters of fabric produced. Just over 2 billion square meters of that was produced in the first half of the year, so then it slowed down to about 1.6 billion. And then that's continued into the first half of this year, where we believe in the region of 1.5 billion square meters of fabric has been printed digitally. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so
I was just going to say, what then do you think was the reason for that quite extreme growth going into the start of the year?
I think it was a result of the pent-up demand, because I mean, unless we saw e-commerce growth, of course, but unless you went online and purchased non-essential goods, you couldn't do it. The only thing you could buy was an essential product when they were locked down. So the pent-up consumer spending was definitely a big thing, and we saw a big recovery for the fashion segment, right? As people were able to go out and socialize and gather like we are today. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's fueled the growth.
And were there any other trends that we've seen?
Oh yeah, so going back going back to the trends, of course.
If you get stuck in the data,
Obviously, businesses are keen to sort of mitigate against the supply chain bottlenecks, which I've mentioned. So we've seen growth in reshoring, on-demand manufacturing, pigment printing, especially in the roll-to-roll space. So pigment printing is obviously more established in other printing segments, but in roll-to-roll printing, there have been issues traditionally around performance and stuff, but and the growth of pigments has been largely in line with home textiles as well, which we've seen growth of during the pandemic, and the output share of home textiles has remained quite strong since, even though fashion has recovered. And in terms of key countries in Asia, India and Pakistan, their markets have really gone from strength to strength with, especially with direct to fabric printing.
And if we think about the key regions, you mentioned some of them there, can we, I guess, delve a little bit deeper into those key markets, say, for example, with Asia and Europe?
Sure, yeah. So Asia remains the most productive of all the regions, as you may expect. In the first half of this year, around 846 million square meters was printed. However, that is 13% down on the second half of 2021, and that's mainly because of what we've seen in China. So they have been suffering, suffering from continued lockdowns due to COVID-19, especially in the first half of this year. So that has limited productivity greatly. And as China is the biggest producer of digitally printed textiles, then such an impact is going to have a broader impact on the Asian region. So yeah, and then if we look at Europe, in the region of 473 million square meters was printed in the first half of this year, which is actually 20% up on the last 6 months of 2021. So like I mentioned about the trends of reshoring and on demand.
Do you think, sorry to interrupt you, that 20% up could be as a result of, not obviously there's the pent-up demand, as you said, but also that people haven't been going to Asia as much because of the problems and the lockdowns in Asia? Do you think that's had an impact in Europe?
I'm not too sure, to be honest.
Or is it more the reshoring movement?
Yes, yeah, so it's going back to the supply chain bottlenecks. Yeah. People want to basically more control over the supply chain, and they're bringing it closer to home. But then we've got more demanding consumers as well. So to meet their demands of the modern day consumer, the lead times need to be shortened. Well, at the moment, lead times are lengthening and lengthening, and it's getting out of hand because of the logistical problems that businesses face. Yeah. So I think the manufacturing in Europe has been brought about, and digital facilitates it as well, because you get cost reductions. Sorry. Yeah, digital facilitates the reshoring movement to Europe, because you can save money, even from a labor point of view. You don't need as many machine operators with a digital printer. So yeah, there are all sorts of cost benefits of printing digitally, and yeah.
And if we look at key countries within Europe, so Italy, for example, do we have figures on that you could share?
Yeah. So Italy and Turkey remain the two biggest producers within Europe. Now, Turkey in particular is looking to capitalize on the reshoring movement and localized manufacturing around Europe, because obviously you've got some really big consumer nations in Europe. Interestingly, Turkey has an above average install base for single pass printers, so they have the capacity to really meet growing demand. So Italy is actually the biggest producer with 111 million square meters. Turkey not far behind with 95 million square meters printed, and those are figures for the first half of this year.
Okay, and with the mention of reshoring, we're also seeing that trend where reshoring and nearshoring in the Americas. How has that impacted these markets? Have we seen growth
Yeah, so in North America, output is up by 16%. It's a very similar story in North America to what we're seeing in Europe, where you know, businesses just want more control. Even from an inventory standpoint, like and the raw materials that businesses need. If you're an ink producer, for instance, in Europe or North America, you have to rely on imports from China, which with the supply chain issues, the costs, they're having to up the costs, and then this is putting a strain on print service providers, and it trickles down the supply chain. So yeah, output is up 16% in North America as businesses look to reshore, and the same can be said for well, no, actually, the same can't be said for South America. Actually, in South America, despite its proximity to the US, you would think that reshoring would be happening, and I think it is. But crucially, output is down 11% in terms of digital roll-to-roll printing, to around 60 million square meters. So this brings into question that just because of reshoring, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's immediately going to be a digital investment. Now, OEMs still have to work hard to sell the benefits, and especially the cost benefits of printing digitally. Because if you're a print service provider in South America, you're printing large volumes, then in the world we live in now with inflation, it wouldn't necessarily make sense for them to invest in perhaps a more expensive digital machine, even though if they look long term, there are a lot of cost benefits to it.
Right, I see. And if we look at that install base, then what trends have developed in terms of the install base, or I guess is it too early to tell pre-pandemic?
Sorry, I'm catching up on the slides. My hands are full. I'm juggling at the minute. I think this is the installations page. Yep. So in terms of installations, then currently where we're at is, I mean, I'm rounding this to the nearest 1,000. So we're currently around 58,000 roll-to-roll printers installed globally, and we expect that to increase to around 65,000 by the end of 2023. Asia is again the largest market in terms of installations, and it's not the most mature market either. So if you consider Europe's a lot more mature, Asia's got a lot further to grow. And I think if I just go back a slide, it actually emphasizes sort of the gap between Asia and Europe now. Since 2018, when Asia first became the most productive country, the gap has just widened more and more in terms of productivity, and it's a similar situation with the installations as well. 26,000 printers installed currently in Asia, and in Europe it's 14,500.
Okay.
And we're seeing similar growth rates in terms of install base in North America and South America. It's around 3 or 4% annual growth rate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And if we think about OEM strategies post-pandemic, and even, I guess, with the energy crisis now, how have OEMs had to change or adapt their strategy and become more flexible in that regard?
Yeah, I think the role of the OEM is to provide a technology that enables print service providers to be more flexible and versatile, because during the pandemic, print service providers had to pivot and print applications that they hadn't printed before. The obvious one is face masks, because obviously fashion applications, signage applications, demand for those plummeted. Sorry, can you repeat?
OEM strategies changing.
Oh yeah, of course. Yes, so yeah, that's the role of the OEM, to produce a printer that enables the print service providers to be versatile. And now, traditionally, I would say in the lead up to ITMA 2019, there was a trend to produce machinery, digital machinery, that was as productive and as cost effective to compete with analog. And for a lot of people, that was single pass, because that is obviously the most productive technology in digital roll-to-roll printing. But since then, we've seen that demand for versatility and flexibility has increased so much and there's been more of an increase in install base for the lower end machinery. So the market is kind of going in two separate directions, and almost to bridge a gap between scanning printing and single pass, we've got now quite a few machines coming to market that print really high volumes but are scanning printers. And for some print service providers, that makes more sense. You've got security around if you've got machine downtime, your production doesn't stop entirely, like it would with if you just had one single pass printer. So yeah, there's definitely been a rise in the number of really industrial grade multipass printers.
That's interesting. And we've also seen, I guess it's not in, we're talking about roll to roll here, aren't we? But you know, we've seen quite a rise in direct to film machines as well. That's something that we keep getting asked about, which is interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
If we move on to, because I know we're very aware of time, application areas.
Sure, yeah.
I keep talking about trends, but you know, what is the data telling you in terms of trends in different application areas? You know, and by that I mean the home textile, soft signage, fashion, sportswear.
So, as you can see on the slide, the breakdown between the application and the region. I would like to say, if you've been looking at the slides and you've been looking at the figures are in billion square meters. Now, in terms of the applications, I mentioned home textiles really grew during the pandemic. It has managed to maintain its market share since then, despite the recovery of fashion. Now, signage is really struggled. And it's event cancellations and hesitancy around going to events that's largely fueling that struggle. Yeah, and I mean, even IMAR Asia was cancelled recently, so still is, and until I would say travel fully recovers and events can happen, and we can be more confident in them taking place, and it will be a struggle for signage. Sorry, go on.
No, you're right. I was just going to say that importantly, we've still seen an uplift in annual production in 2021, all right?
Oh, in 2021, definitely, yeah. Production was above expectations. It was 3.7 billion square meters in 2021. Now, we don't expect to reach that level this year for obvious reasons, the energy crisis and the supply chain issues. But we do expect it to get to 3.2 billion square meters. That's the forecast for this year. And that would be slightly above what we saw in 2019. So, except for the first 6 months of 2020 and the first 6 months of 2021, which were anomalies, the actual, I wouldn't say it's flatlined, it's slow growth, but given the climate in which we're living, it's encouraging, and crucially, capacity continues to increase. So once demand is there from the consumer, then the digital textile printing market really looks set to increase its overall share of textile printing, which is currently around 10%, and back in 2018 it was more around 7%. So it is growing, but we expect that growth to accelerate in the years ahead.
Well, I guess if we talk about projections, then what are your market projections for 2023?
2023, we expect it to reach around 3.4 billion.
3.4.
So again, like I said, slow but steady growth, which is okay under the current climate. Yeah, but you know, we've got things like the on-demand trend. So there isn't necessarily a need to print as much as we were before. It's about printing sustainably. And with on-demand, you can do that. You can cut down your productivity, yet still fulfill the needs of the consumer because you're printing on demand. And it would be a great world if we lived in a time when retailers didn't have to do the end of season sales. And obviously we know from a sustainability standpoint that a lot of the purchases made at that time during a sales period end up in landfill. So
yeah. I just want to check how we're doing for time. 5 minutes. Okay, so I think then it's a good point for us to end on a positive note of the projections. And then we've got 5 minutes for questions. Does anybody in the audience have any questions for Joe? Oh, Nicole, can we get a microphone to Nicole? There we go.
Okay, it's working now. Thank you, Madeleine and Joe, for the great briefing. Truly appreciated. You have commented greatly H1. Do you already have a flavor on how our H2 is going? What do you see from here till year end?
Yeah, sure. So we expect to see productivity increase marginally in the second half of this year. I think we forecasted 3.2 billion square meters for this calendar year, and the first half was around 1.5. So we expect to see a slight increase, and that's because obviously we don't anticipate further COVID-19 restrictions in China. So we expect productivity to really increase the levels we've seen in the last 6 months of last year. So on that basis, yeah, we expect to see a modest recovery, growth in productivity.
I guess, is that despite current market challenges as well?
Yeah, despite the current market challenges, yeah.
Well, that's good.
And I mean, if I say certain aspects of the digital textile productivity may have slowed, but if you look at and compare it to the analog market, then actually digital is performing very well still. We've seen a lot bigger declines in other printing segments.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. And thanks, Nicole. Any other questions? Do we have any from our, oh, hi, yep, gentleman over here. Oh. Maybe passing that one, yeah.
This one is working? Okay. I'm sorry. I'm Thomas Pötz, 3T Consulting. I have the question. How much impact will the sort of sustainability have to digital growth, to the growth of digital printing on textiles?
Okay, so
how much impact will the sort of sustainability have to the growth of digital textile printing?
It will definitely fuel growth in terms of output year by year, but it's the type of printing that will take place. So we expect to see a lot more pigment printing in the roll-to-roll direct-to-fabric space. And it's not just sustainability that will be fueling that, it's the current energy crisis as well, because with reactives, you've got a lot of extra ancillary equipment to factor in. So long-term, if you're investing now in a particular printing solution, you would want to go with pigment. It would make more financial sense to do so currently because of the energy crisis. But then if you factor in consumer demand for more sustainable fashion, then of course it's only going to be a positive for digital, because digital pigment printing is probably the most sustainable printing process at the moment.
We're also seeing a trend, I guess, in line with the pigment towards using natural fabrics to print on, as opposed to, say, polyester.
Yeah, can I precise my question maybe? What is the impact, so to say, the add-on? There's a certain expectation that digital printing will grow, but is there an expected add-on because of sustainability? So it means there's a factor X which will speed up digital textile printing because of the sustainability issues.
Yeah, I think it's definitely acting as an accelerant.
Okay, how much is that? What do you expect?
In terms of percentages?
Yes, and then in the region, is it in Europe different than in North America or in Asia? How do you see that?
The question is a good one, but right now I don't have the precise figures, so perhaps we could discuss during the coffee break, and I would happily look at that in more detail with you, if that's okay.